right, here we go.
So, Mr. Bomar, I want to introduce you to the social work class. This is a very intelligent, bright group of students that are trained to go out and impact and engage the world. And I did a very poor job introducing you because I felt that if anything, you can, your resume is so extensive. So got a chance to briefly look at the the Spirit Tech website. But please let the class know who you are. And class, I want to welcome you all to 7 Bomar.
All right, homeless class, it's amazing to be connecting with you again. All right, thanks for that applaud. I'm not used to that. I just wanted to definitely connect with everyone today. Obviously a great friend of mine asked me to come in and to, talk about what has been really instrumental in what I've been developing and how I connect with others. And, I'm just looking to have really a concise masterclass about just utilizing some tools that anywhere you go, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it'll allow you to excel to your highest potential. So I'm going to give a brief introduction because obviously everything these days is about accolades and credits and having some kind of authority to speak on specific subjects. And I also believe that that is sometimes the reason why, some people that are more than equipped to begin to address some of the massive situations going on the planet still feel underqualified, and it's because they didn't get a Nobel Peace Prize or something that allows them to necessarily have a voice in an open forum of credibility. And that's, of course, unfortunate because now we see that things are changing, that now you can actually have your own podium. You can start on YouTube, right? And with that, you'll actually be able to even accumulate more viewers and more watchers than syndicated radio shows and even television stations. So this is a new world, and we want to constantly prepare ourselves for that. And we want to make sure that we have the tools necessary to what we'll talk about today, which is deprogram ourselves and to reprogram ourselves based on what will be most optimal in the experience. And again, just to give a little background on myself, about 7 years ago, I wrote a book called The Code to the Matrix. And that book was actually, it was concise with what I felt was the most valuable thing to me at that point. And I actually gave it away for free. So I believe that it started this weird chain reaction that if you really give what is valuable to you, because let's say, for instance, in the world, if I ask someone to, hey, design a website for me or do some graphics for me, generally it's how much I pay them that determines if they're going to go into the kitty and really get out those special images that they've been saving for that special client. That's generally money that determines that for them. But I was actually functioning at another capacity where I just had this genuine interest to pass this information that I had figured out along to humanity. And c'est la vie. Like it actually, I wasn't really too concerned about the response that I was going to get from that. I just felt like I was obligated to do that. So needless to say, when I did give that book away, I published it online for free on scribe.com. It went viral. So within 3 days, it had about 500,000 views. And I was just getting overloaded with emails because I left my email in the back of the book. Never thought anyone was going to email me. And I left my email address in the back of the book. And I was just getting overloaded with emails from people saying, hey, this is not only what I'm experiencing, you seem to know a little bit more. Tell me more about your story. What are you doing now? Where are you? So this started something a while back that we just called the Resistance. The site was resistance2010.com. And the whole theme behind it was to use all of our power and our energy as an open source way of discovering deeper levels of spirituality. Everybody just had in common that they were looking deeper. They wanted a greater connection with all there really is. And they had come to the conclusion that while a lot of the stuff that's out there, it offers, some sort of connection, it's just not vivid enough. And it's just not specific enough. So that's how it launched in that endeavor. And that site grew to approximately 14,000 people before we needed to transition into another site. And not only was it just 14,000 members, there was millions of impressions all over the internet from people who just, weren't members, but interacted with what we were doing. So something was born that I would say the key to its birth was how I initially came at it. I initially came at it with this idea of giving what is valuable away. Okay. Now in business, they tell you that that's really what it is to create a successful business. You have to find something that has a lot of value for people, and then you implement that into the system. And of course, if it has the value you say it does, then people are going to patronize you. So obviously there's different ways to create value. The society has now really figured out the idea around how to make people believe something is valuable. And you see that a lot in marketing. You see there's a specific sequence that they go through with first giving something for free, like WhatsApp did, and all these different apps and a lot of different things you see. They give you that free part of it, and then that's to develop more of a relationship with you. And then finally the big hammers drop, hey, this is how much it costs, okay? So if we look at these, if we look at these systems, we look at these prototypes, what we can come to a conclusion of is, first of all, this idea of what I want to introduce, which I call firmware, okay? And I'm sure everyone in the class may be aware of what firmware is, but if there's someone that's not, I will define it. In, let's say, a computer, the firmware is the part of the system you generally can't change. It's generally the part that is responsible for, when you push that power button, getting you all the way into the operating system. Not saying that you can't change it. You can always update your firmware. But just generally, this is not something that you're going to have readily, you're not going to be able to readily access it like you would be able to load in Microsoft Office or Word or something like this, right? And so we would have to ask ourselves, what is really the best template to use in 2017 to get a deeper look at what's going on in the mind, the body, and the soul, and all the things that they say that we're comprised of. And interesting enough, even though some people will argue with you, I found that actually computers were a really good prototype to look at to understand different parts of the consciousness. Amazingly, cars are too. In fact, anything that has to work generally contains the components that our human bodies function on. And so if with electronic device, if this thing's got to turn on with a computer, if it's got to compute, then it has to have certain components that we can then map out like, hey, this is the body's correspondence to that. So the reason why I want to bring that up is that the first question would be, if we function like a computer, then if what I'm saying is true, then what is our software? What is our program? And obviously people would come to the conclusion that our actually our language, right? Because just like you program a computer in a language, you too have also been programmed, predominantly everyone in this class, programmed in a language called English. Now let me show you how first that there's some groundbreaking things that have just been discovered, or maybe have been known for quite a bit of time, but have always remained kind of like on the back burner or hidden from humanity. And unless you kind of get that news flash, then you're never aware of it. Now, of course, I'm building to something here. And that thing is, and I'm doing a share screen really briefly here. That thing is actually the code to language. In fact, that was what my book was called. It was called The Code to the Matrix. And I named it that because at the end of the movie, you know, actually I didn't have that same response that everybody had to the Matrix. Like I think I even kind of fell asleep. I was like working really hard, and you know, I went to see this movie late. I think I maybe was on a date or something, and I kind of like fell asleep towards the end. So I got that whole that jolt of when, you know, it's over and you're like, okay. And then after that, a lot of people kept talking about it all the time. And they were like, yeah, you seen The Matrix? And I was like, yeah, I seen it. So ironically, I ended up writing a book called The Code to the Matrix years later, because when I tried to crystallize, since I realized so much of what was going on in the movie was true, when I tried to crystallize what was really the whole thing about, it was really about the agents getting the code to the mainframe. And if we can think about that, what that really means is that if they can get the code to your mainframe, like to control your consciousness, control your mind, then it can be programmed. So this is very far along on the quest, as I called it. This is what I discovered, that many of the ancient languages like Hieratic and Demotic script actually break down to symbols, okay? That what they are is they're actually symbols pulled apart. So what you're looking at here is Hebrew or Yiddish, and how when it's pulled apart, then you get this language, but when it's put back together, then you get this, what's known as a Megan star in history, which some people later on began to call the Star of David. So if you can imagine them, you know, just what this means when you understand geometry and those kind of things, you realize that, hey, this is fascinating. But is it an isolated scenario? Is it only Hebrew that actually functions like this? And so I started this huge quest of taking apart languages and figuring out if there was like a pattern here. And sure enough, like years later, you know, after studying many languages and realizing, yeah, there were some very intricate patterns, I still was in this search of finding English's pattern, right? Because when you study English and you go back really far, you realize that it actually connects to the Celtic languages. It connects to High Germanic. That's why really when you play English backwards, for anyone who's done that, it actually sounds a little like German. But what happens is that language is so powerful for us because it doesn't change like everything else changed. Like it doesn't go out like bell bottoms will go out and then maybe they'll come back in again. When language is set, it's set for thousands of years. And so when I proved that language was a code, then I was able to really define that for a prolonged period of time, there has been a system of programming going on. All right, so this is English's, what it breaks down to. And amazingly, all of these breaks down to what's called hexes in our geometrics, right? And this would get us into realization that language is even deeper than a computer program. It's more of a spell, meaning something that is a tone or a vibration or a frequency that has a certain level of power. It does more than we think, but yet and still, we look at music and we look at so many other things. And we know how much music has an impact on us, but we don't realize that it's those tones, it's those vibrations, it's those beats, and all that really is impacting us. It's really what's making us feel like, hey, we like this song, or I like what they're saying, or I believe what they're saying. But now we're in a new time, and knowledge there's so much of it, it's basically where people can't even really delve into it and consume it anymore. Google has so much knowledge and information that if you don't just pick something specific, you'll be Googling all night. So imagine a person that never had a library and always wanted one. Now all of a sudden on Google, what you would really see is you would see the person at some point getting exhausted into the realization that, hey, you're never going to know everything. So what's most important is that you know the root to everything, the core of how things are controlled. Because not only does this have profound effects on the people that you'll be dealing with, it also has profound effects on the most important central character in the entire theme, and that would be you. And the reason is because when your eyes close, my eyes don't close. I still see. So generally, maybe when you leave the world or I leave the world, you may remain. I may remain. So there's a lot about us that's still very individual, even though we're constantly working as a collective. And in fact, this is the paradoxical side of the entire thing, and that you'll discover if you ever look deeper into this kind of knowledge that I'm revealing here, is that there's a lot of paradoxes going on. There's a spirit that lives inside of a flesh. There's a day that consists also of night. There's a good that mingles with bad. And what happens is when we function on this, what I would say is a binary code. Is it good? Is it bad? Do I like it? Is it right or is it wrong? What happens is we have to realize one major key important thing, that if I dropped you on another planet, that they were talking a different language and you had a different kind of parents, that and friends and et cetera, your environment, that would control what you think, how you believe, and most importantly, it would control all of your judgments. So this is important because I think there's one scripture that says, hey, judge and ye shall be judged. But since most people spend all of their time in judgment, meaning it's like, okay, I like that person, I don't like that person. In fact, it doesn't even go it goes deeper than just do we like a person or not. There's a lot of judgments that we make all the time just because that's how we function every day. Like we base things on contrast. We know light because of darkness. We know red because of blue. So we base things on contrast, and that's exactly how the body is wired. But what if a little bit of biohacking, if you may, would open up an entirely new potential, a potential where you would cease to function on this binary code, this good-bad system that's been instilled, and you would start working with more of a trinary code that gives you the access to the extra spatial. Now, I'm going to explain to you why we know that this place exists, or this level of consciousness exists. actually through computers. Because what I'm talking about right now, we need to ground it into something for anyone to even sit around long enough to think that it's plausible, because their mind is hardwired to believe that it's not. So you have to give them a comparison of what happened just now with the idea of standard computing, like your 48636 processors, all the way from there, all the way to what we're using now, Intel Core processors, et cetera, to now this new jump into quantum machines, right? They call that quantum computing, like Deep Blue, deep thinking machines, right? So when you look at that, if you realize that what I know, which is computers are this template of human beings, albeit quite crude, there's now a new computer that has been introduced that's very much involved in artificial intelligence. And this computer is known as a quantum mainframe. So I'm going to break it down for you. I'm not going to get this into a complex computer course. The biggest difference between a quantum computer and a general binary computer is the quantum computer can now function in this space called quantum, which for us would be trinary. And in that space, they have the ability to be in two places at once. So how a computer functions, with generally it needs to be a 0 or a 1, this new computer, it could be in both spaces at the same time. So this does wonders for programming languages. It even allows these computers to decrypt even the strongest encryption being used today in some of the spy industries and those kind of things. That's what they originally built these systems for. But how we cross this over into who we are is you need to realize that we are already trinary, if not beyond, but we were already trinary systems. We were already quantum systems. But now, because you're a quantum system, but you're using a binary software, you can't actually go and maximize yourself into the full potential of who you are until you learn to speak a new language. And this new language will actually allow you to go into any session, to any space, and to be able to communicate not from an energetic field of judgment, but from one who is there that is fitting in at the perfect time for a specific situation. And some people call that synchronicity. Like, wouldn't you love to always be in the right place at the right time? What I've actually uncovered is that what these binary languages do is they move like blocks in your mind, i.e. the geometry that we just looked at is basically a cube. It's like a cube tumbling over, but really your mind is a wheel. It needs more of a circular motion in order to move into flow. Now, many people call that the Zen. There's a name for this, that when someone's, let's say, playing basketball and they're just shooting that shot, and they're just nailing it every time. They're not thinking, okay, so I'm about this far away. My trajectory is going to be about 35 degrees. And then once that, the gust of the wind, and it's going to catch it, and then it's going to, that's not what's happening. There's a zone that they're not even thinking about anything, and they're just in that space. And that space is the space you want to start getting familiar with. Now, don't get super excited. You know, I'm going to have some questions or be able to answer some questions, but I do want to say a couple things in relation to what I'm presenting here. Now, first of all, so we've started to uncover that maybe there's some programming going on, and everyone's heard of this, that, hey, you know, TV's programming you and all this going on. But now we know that the programming is as deep as the language. And where we want to go is we want to go into this firmware, this hard-coded idea of who we think that we are. We want to kind of move some of the things out of the way. We want to hit some switches in there. So how do we get in there? So first, we have realized that our ideas and our beliefs are formed by what has gone on with us in our rearing or when we're brought up. But I want to ask a question here just to get an idea of what the class is working with. By show of hands, how many here have heard of cryptocurrency? Okay. Is that like a half show of hand? I can't see the hand. It's like, is y'all resting the hand on the desk? So there's two hands.
I think it's probably like what, 2 hands up?
2 hands. Okay, so that's 2, 3 hands. Okay. How many people are in the class?
19, 18.
About 20, 18 to 20?
Okay, so my mathematician, so what percentage is that? What percentage is that of the class that knows about cryptocurrency?
Less than 5%.
Less than 5%. Okay, so I want you to take this in your mind right now because I'm showing you a real life example. Now, when you come out of this class, the percentages are not going to change. About actually 2% of the world knows about cryptocurrency, but it's not about to change everything. It's already changing everything, and the banks are scrambling. But I'm just giving you an example, a powerful example, because what you'll see in this is that, see, if our minds are conditioned to just deal with traditional banking, that's how we understand it. Look, I work, you pay me, I get this dead president, and I go take him and do whatever I need to do with it, and that's it. Like everything else that goes on behind the doors of that bank, I ain't got nothing to do with, because after all, that ain't my money. Whoa, okay. That's actually a very straight definition right there. But what if it could be your money? What if you could be the bank? Now, I'm not here to talk to you about cryptocurrency today. What I want you to realize is that all the time, we always must be aware that something's jumping, something's moving, something's shaking, something big is happening. And just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it's not taking place. And even more than that, it doesn't even mean that if you found out that you would be able to regroup yourself and do something about it if you didn't know how to go back in and to reprogram your firmware. Because there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes up. It's going to be, it's going to be endless. Why would I want to put my money somewhere else that's in something I can't touch? And why would I want to switch off the dollar? And there's just going to be so many questions. But what you're really saying is, I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. It's not how I really function, nor do I have time for that. And I'm moving on. Now, what I'm here to tell you is cryptocurrency is the equivalent, if not greater, than when the internet was introduced. Now, maybe everyone in this class is a bit younger. However, I'm 38 now. So I was there when Prodigy first came online, and then American Online came in a little bit after that. So I was still a kid. I was probably in 8th grade, something like that, but I remember the whole thing. Now, if at that point I had bought yellow.com, which I could have, even as a kid, red.com, just those two domains right there, I'd have at least $20 million on me right now, okay? So this means that something happened that we were able-bodied to do something about, to get involved in, but somehow we missed out. We missed the train. Cryptocurrency is that same thing. But this time, I would hope that, as I say to myself, hey, but this time now you're a lot older and you're more wiser. So I've definitely gotten involved. And even for this class, you may take that information, since you're already getting into information and educating yourself, and you say, hey, maybe this is something I need to investigate, and then it changed your future for you. And then maybe in the future at some point you'll be like, man, I'm glad I listened to that guy in the class. Or maybe you'll be that person like I was when this old guy was telling me when I hit 23 or whatever, and I just had got my Mustang 5.0, and so I was on something else. And he was like, youngster, why don't you take like a little bit of your money, like 20% or whatever, because I was actually doing well, and put that into gold or something. And I was like, okay, donuts, see, so there's this disconnection that happens. And I realized that this disconnection, when you realize for yourself, like if we look up at the sky and we can see that it's cloudy, so we know that it's going to be a rainy day soon. Why can't we look into the reality and see, after some earthquakes, some eclipses, some hurricanes, that maybe the future is going to change? And instead of actually being like always at the other end of the stick, starting to prepare ourselves for the change, starting to plan. And this planning, it first starts with yourself. It starts with you going back on yourself, like laying yourself on this operation table. And you're saying, okay, now I'm forced to go back into this being that I know as myself, and to make some adjustments about how I see things in order for me to reach what? Okay, so this is a big part of what I want to talk about today. For me to reach what? See, we set these goals in life. And what I've often found is that when people generally reach goals, if they didn't make any more goals after that, they kind of get clueless after that point, and they just don't know what to do next. It's just like, I never prepare for it. So it's better to either create a great goal for yourself, or to create like a sequence of goals that keep rolling one after another. So I prefer personally to set a great goal, because I don't want to start trying to memorize every single stage of things. So what is the greatest goal that you could set for yourself here on planet Earth? I'm not going to say anybody answer that question, because it's just like a really open-ended question. The answer for me is sovereignty. And I'm going to explain to you why. Sovereignty. So what does it mean? It basically means to be able to handle yourself, to not depend on anybody or anything. And there's a great level of comfort and power that comes with that. But few have ever been able to achieve that if you look at history. How many actual people have functioned as sovereigns? So sovereignty is funny because it starts with when you go home, when you turn on the lights, that power, which is what it's called, is coming from something else. When you turn on the tap, that water is coming from something else. So yes, you're paying for it in this fiat currency, but at the end of the day, if the light shut off, it's not going to be you that goes back to the backyard and figures out what's stuck into the hydro dam or whatever to turn your power back on. So I'm talking about life goals here. Your life goal should always be, just so you don't get distracted in that whole path of achievement, sovereignty, to one day be able to sit on your own land with your own well, with your own sustainable energy, flip your own lights on. Because when you do that, you'll receive personally, even along the whole process, if you just keep that in your mind, you actually start developing yourself into the highest, if you want to say players in the game. If we want to look at the matrix itself sometimes as being some kind of game. That's why people sometimes say, hey man, you got to learn how to play the game. Like, so all that goes on out there that you'll experience when you come in with your heart, meaning that this is about social work. So you'll come in with your heart and you'll see a lot of people won't be actually coming from the heart space. They'll be coming from more of a mechanical / matrix based state. Like, hey, what is this going to benefit us? What is the bottom line? How many numbers can we accumulate for this? So they're going to come at you with that. And what happens is that this is how a heart becomes cold if you don't remember your goal. Because see, the heart can become cold when you start observing that others are not in it like you're in it. That's one of the main things. It's like, okay, so they just trying to keep their job, or they don't even care what goes on with those kids because they just want to get the stamp of approval so they can say that they actually accomplished something. So you'll see a lot of that. So if you're actually depending on all of that to drive you to your personal goal, this means that you won't make it, because the moment you start experiencing that too much, you'll be like, okay, well, I mean, it's not what I thought it was. It's always what you know it is. And so the key point here is that you have to realize that you're doing this for your own goals. So this is a big shift in how we normally do things. We always say, well, I'm doing it for the kids. Well, I'm doing it for the adults. I'm doing it for the people who are homeless. I'm doing it for the people who have injustice. No, you're doing it for yourself. Because if you're not into it anymore, then none of that is going to be able to benefit from what you have to offer. You'll be just another person there, hollow, with the program running, doing something generally like maybe pushing paperwork. Okay, here's another person's house I'm going to go to. Okay, let's fill out the form. How's everything doing? Okay. And it's going to be a real loss of who you truly are, because you have to also remember this is a part of your identity, this field you're embarking in. However, the greater side of who you are, this needs to be a process of you getting to that. That way you don't feel let down, because you'll have lots of successes. Successes when you change someone's life. Successes is when you open up a company, let's say, and it works. Successes is when you file for a grant and they give it to you. Those are your successes. But fulfillment, these two different words are totally different. Fulfillment is when you can lay back at 40, 50, whenever you achieve it, and really feel no regrets. Feel like you got the t-shirt. If you left Earth now, you wouldn't need to even come back, because there would be nothing to come back for. You did it. So really what you're pushing towards is this fulfillment, and to demystify what really exists in there for you, because I had to go and explore that and figure that out. It was the sovereignty. It was the awareness that I could be personally working on the path of becoming the Lord, the master, the God of my own creation, right? So this means total responsibility put back into your place. See, so now a lot of people, they want to know, well, how come I'm always so dependent on so many other things? Because think about it. Like when you get into the field, and you got a plan and you're ready to get it done. And then they're like, but hey, we need to get that approved first. And you know this is going to work. You know this is going to impact things, but they're still going through that same mechanical process. What is going to allow you to come up with the system that's necessary to get it done, even if others don't want to do it? It's going to be based on your own volition. It's going to be based on your own strength. Now, here's something that I've also learned, the last tidbit here. The strongest frequency always wins. Okay, so I sit in this lab. I got a lab here actually in the house, and we do all these weird experiments with water, and we study cymatics and stuff like this language. That's even like just a small part of what we really get into, because we really want to understand communication. Communication is antennas. Communication is the ability to read into something that others are not. And if people, or others can't. Now, if people think that that's so far-fetched, you're actually sitting in an institution, and most people are that, believed for a while, or at least the founders of it believed for a while, that there was not even another world that existed, until someone put a few lenses together and showed them that there was a world called the microscopic world, right? And that all of these different creatures and animals and insects, and it did wonders, right? But somehow we still get stuck in, let's say, the original definition of the English word school, which comes from the German word Schul, which means to become the accepted thing. So we get stuck in this idea of what's actually accepted, to forget, and we forget that it's the pioneers, the one or the two people. Those are the ones that we're using their computers. We're on their phones. We're on their, let's say hydraulic pumps, whatever. So it's never everybody that's involved in one specific thing that's going to help everyone, okay, or help more people. It's always one or two people. Now, of course, we would want that to change, but we'll take it as it is now. This is what you constantly have to reinforce yourself with when you ever ask yourself the question, why me? How could I change the whole thing? I'm coming from like, and you give yourself, I did this and that. Someone else is far more qualified. This is how the brain has been wired to think. I mean, you're talking about billions, changing billions of people. I mean, I need a lot of people. No, you only need yourself. And you need that ability to be able to go into self and change some of your hard-coded beliefs and hardcore ideologies so you can become more versatile. So this gets us into realizing that versatility is a big key. So we're going to talk about some hard-coded beliefs in this structure called the world, in order to show how some of these things can actually be resonant within our consciousness. Now, the question is, can someone's proclaimed religious belief disarm you? Okay, I'll read that question again. Can someone's proclaimed religious belief disarm you? Okay, so what I'm saying is, if someone just proclaims to be something, can that then affect how we look at them, how we handle the situation, and who we even believe they are? Of course, the answer is yes. We see it happen all day, where you have politicians that literally say, and we want to, thank God for saving all those lives, and we're going to go drop some bombs on some other lives. I mean, it's just like, okay, well, wait a minute. Where's the mix up here? But it's for certain people that are triggered that way, when they hear, we want to thank God, what that computer in their consciousness, their software says, oh, at least he's God-fearing. I'm on his side. You see, so what happens is there's a lot of these embedded stereotypes that actually don't even mean what they were originally designed to be. And I'm going to give you something to research to prove that. There's a word that's called egregor. Okay, very strange word. You don't even find it anywhere. It's E-G-R-E-G-O-R-E-S, egregors. Okay. Now, I found this word like deep into research about what controls people's minds. And what I came up with, to not create a conspiracy, was a system that was being used that allowed our collective energy, anything that we believe in, to begin to manifest in some kind of way or another, and even begin to be used to even interact with us. And I'll give you an explanation of that, a very simple explanation. Let's say Nike, okay? Nike as a company. Now, Nike, if you notice with companies, they have names that mean that you're actually forming some kind of human or ghost or something. Why? They call it a corporation. Everyone knows a corpus means a body, or corp as in a corpse. They say, hey, let's form the entity. This is generally a word that's a reference to actually more of spiritual beings than actually brick buildings, but they use that word. And there's a lot of words that are used because they're not reinventing the wheel when they create the biggest companies. They're actually trying to redesign what's actually in the human body and then bring it into like a functioning structure. That's what they call the great work, okay? So what has been discovered is that you have these systems that are formulated on these principles, okay? And this is what an egregor means. It means that when something is started, that there's a specific set of rules, a ritual, if you may, that must be conducted in order for it to remain in the status that it's been created for. And also it will continuously grow and become more powerful, okay? So anything can be egregors. You can create them yourself. You could even be one if you alter into another state of mind. You deal with them in religion. Some of the religions are the most powerful egregors. But let me give you a deeper definition. Let's say, for instance, at the beginning of Christianity, right, which was Gnosticism, you had a group of individuals that believed in something, and then they set up rules and a structure around it, which is just called a ritual. And as long as everyone practiced that ritual, then it would keep growing the more that it got larger. But unfortunately, the rules to an egregor are, if somehow those rules are not continuously followed, those rituals are not practiced the way they were initially by the ones who created it, then it actually starts to take on a life of its own. That when we get together, let's say 100,000 of us, and we believe in something specific, we actually begin to animate it. See, you know, they always want to know, where does nothing come from? Well, I can't tell you where nothing comes from, but I can tell you how things get into this space. And it's through concentration of passion. Okay, but that's how you also came into the world. They call that an orgasm, concentration of passion. Okay, so even deeper than that, when ideas are brought, and there's you ever seen a martyr and how vigorous they are? So there's a concentration of passion when something's created. Now, some people create companies like that. They have such a strong passion to create this new thing. It's like, and then they got the rules and they got the merch and the set down, the branding, and you see, so that's what I'm talking about the ritual. It creates something. And then the more people believe in it, the larger it grows. So in conclusion, you have so many of these egregors in the world that have lived thousands of years, ideas and concepts. Because those frequencies are so dominant, like I said, the strongest frequency wins. This means that oftentimes a mind, especially a younger mind that's still making its decisions, still determining what it likes and what it doesn't like, can be completely conditioned by a much more older dominant frequency that has never deviated from what it is, or slowly grown over a period of time. So this leads us to ask ourselves the major question. Why aren't people really riding around in Model Ts right now? Well, the answer to that question is because we upgraded it. We don't, that engine, I mean, nothing like what you would see in a Bugatti, nothing even like you would see in a Hyundai. Everything has changed. So why can't we give that same update to the highest level of what we believe in? So if you say, so what field controls the highest level of what you believe in? It's actually spirituality. Like, who is the head honcho of the entire thing in most people's mind? God. What would happen if the person switched that to themselves in total realization that they are God? If you think about it, if it says you're a son of God, let's say in most traditions, they at least claim that you're the son of whatever the deity is, or the daughter of whatever the deity is. So what happens when you grow up? Do you not become the full grown one? So, I can only answer the question for you. You would have to experience it yourself, but the answer is yes. And what occurs from there, what happens in the world for you is your unique story. Because this is the main thing that I found out about the whole thing that was just, I just constantly in these aha eureka moments. But you know how this one thing on my finger right now called the fingerprint is unique to me, right? Are we all aware that the fingerprint is unique, right? It is something on us that literally shows us that, nah, you are all not the same. Everyone has their own spin. If you think about it, that's what it really is. It's a spin. So even when you say, hey man, put your own spin on it, that's what's really being referred to. Take the core of what's being said and then put your own spin on it and compute it in your own consciousness to say, okay, so ultimately, what is this person attempting to assist me with? What kind of resources is here for me to mine? Now, obviously I've dropped lots of jewels. For some, it may have just completely went over the head what I was referring to. Some it just hit right into the heart and it's just really at home. Others will write it down and ponder it a bit more, may even develop a philosophy of it. But the truth is that's all of what we're here for. We're here to have this experience with one another, to receive another person's experience. Of course, we need to go and have our own, but it's to increase what we do. So we're not just downloaders. Just remember that. We're not just always taking in the program because that's what the reality wants to do. It just wants to just, hey, this is what I need you to do. We got friends like that. They just want to commandeer all of our time for what they want to do. So this is not foreign. It's actually a part of human nature. Sometimes we would even make it diabolical, and it does have sometimes those kind of underlying themes. But the truth is, it's who we are. So what you have to do is you have to make sure in all of that, that being naive or having a huge heart doesn't allow you to escape the facts that there's still mechanics of what's going on here. Like even what I'm showing you within the language, this, when you really study it, it allows you to forgive everyone. Let's say, for instance, you're holding grudges with someone maybe hurt you, those kind of things. You realize that, shoot, there's a whole nother program that's going on in most people's consciousness. So even the people that are halfway functioning, halfway wanting to do the good thing, and they may just pissed you off a little bit, they have to be completely fortified within themselves and strong within themselves to just stay sane in this. So that's why you can always go back to yourself and realize that you're enduring so much in this experience. But what you should know is, and I'll say this and I'm done and I'll take some questions. What you should know is that this is how the whole thing works. It's no different than our process of getting here. When somebody wants to ask the question about, hey, how do we even get here on earth? What is all this about? No difference in the same process of what your parents did to bring you here. And in that whole process, there's a very key point that's often missed about us bringing any large projections, any massive ideas into this world. What that's about is, you've, I'm sure, seen large trees. Let's say the sequoia. Have you ever seen a sequoia tree seed? Sequoia tree seed is no bigger than half of my thumb. But yet, this huge tree is growing. So why is there this process of making something massive small first, as small as it can be, and then it grows up to be this massive thing? Why is it that process? Well, so that it can get through the womb. So if we look at, and this is the biggest analogy of all, if we look at what's really going on even with us, we were made infinitesimally small, placed into this little bitty developing unit called a womb, and then in the egg, and then we develop into even who we are now. And this is the process of how things work. This is the royal blueprint, if you may. So always remember, with your big projections, you got to know how to crystallize it into that seed first. So that way you can get it into the womb of Earth. See, because let me just show you just how you know this exists. Where are most of our ideas at anyway? In our consciousness, right? Like we may even share them with friends. We may even dream about them. They're not necessarily here yet, but they're somewhere. They're in this other space. So to get that here, it's got to pass through a womb. And how to get it through the womb, this is why you don't have grown adults, baby coming out with a beard. Like, it's not going to happen because it can't go through the womb like that. You always have to remember everything that you're designing, learn how to secure it, to pack it up properly. That's why I say you got to have things like focus, like sovereignty, so nobody's bothering you when they're doing something stupid. You're just like, shoot, I'm focused here and I'm packaging it up. Okay, bam. And you know the phases, because remember, just because you now packaged it properly, now it's in the womb, it's growing, then it comes out, right? But it's not, when it comes out, it still needs you to help it grow. You got to be able to coax whatever it is that you're creating and developing to that stage of where it's about 18, 19, and you've been the great parent of it. And now it's ready to go on its own. It's now like this grown version of who you are, and it's ready to function on its own. And this is how we can begin to use other templates to interpret what we're experiencing in the reality. Because see, even language, this is why in deep conversations, parables are always spoken. It's because language as it is by itself is not capable of giving us the expression that we need when we're talking about greater things, mainly ourselves. So we're forced to come up with stories. This is even what happened in Egypt. They zoomorphied everything. That means that animals have more characteristics. Like if you ever watch the ibis, how it moves, how patient it is, how precise it is, how it treats itself when it gets sick. It gives itself its own enema. So if you ever watch this bird, if you just had that bird as like, let's say how we would say the letter A, it's going to mean so much to show someone that bird when you're trying to write something to them than it ever would be if you wrote them an entire paragraph, because it's giving all of the traits. It's giving colors. It's giving so many more things. So that's what the ancients used to communicate. That's how embroidered their language was. Now we're using a language that's basically made out of syllables and doesn't truly give us the expressions of who we are until you build on that language. And this is why we can describe what we talk about, what we really feel, even though it may take us a little bit longer. We use spoken word. We use all these different tools to really music. We use all of those things to express, to put more body around what we want to communicate. So remember, this is something that we do. And the way that you can become more expanded at that is that you start going back into the firmware and saying, hey, is my belief about that formed on my environment and how I've experienced things thus far? If I had a different set of parents and I grew up in a different place, would I actually believe and think that way? So overall, when you're sitting down at night, you're laying there on the bed and you're having that thought, you'll start realizing the power and realizing that you can change everything about yourself. It doesn't mean necessarily that you go and do it necessarily, but the sheer fact of beginning to play around with that, hey, I can change all of this, who I am. This puts you in the most powerful position of versatility. So that way, when you get into a situation, you become more of the chameleon in the situation and not the rule or the boundary or the judgment that starts to hold everything up. So this is how you free up spaces. So
I got a question.
Go ahead.
And I want to open up to the class as well to please have, some questions. When dealing with various different religions, because, we're in a country that, of course, is religious, freedom of religion. And sometimes that can clash or interfere with the way when we have to see clients, when we work with people. Our belief systems don't connect or don't correlate with that of our clients. Now, how are you able to work with thousands of people with thousands of different belief systems and come to a certain conclusion or a common conclusion?
Well, there's something that we've developed, and it's actually called Unified. It's off of just the realization that since everyone is unique, that we actually need that person. It's like the same thing with the structure of any kind of business. You work to find something that actually others are missing, and that's kind of like what's unique. It's like if we're missing it, it's because nobody's really delivered it to this point. So it's the same thing as when you get into any kind of scenario, and that's actually why I really began the entire conversation and present the conversation about deprogramming, because there's nothing directly. There's always going to be something that doesn't vibe with what you like to do. That could be a religion. That could be how a person is being treated. That's the color paint on the wall. There could be an endless amount of this that actually could hold the same amount of weight and vibration. So what I basically chose to do in this conversation is instead of focusing on how we're going to just change that verbally by saying, hey, you know, you shouldn't be like that. Like if other people have other beliefs, then their beliefs are filling in a certain structure, and we need that entire structure. Kind of pulling it out of the way would be to collapse the entire thing. It's literally like if you remove that one card that's on that bottom of that card house, then it all falls down. All of what we know as culture, and this is obviously what you're studying in history and these kind of classes, but what we know is that everything is collectively building. Like I would trust that others weren't still in a stagnant state of mind of believing that, you know, all of these different traditions and religions aren't all really founded on the same principles, if not even the same mentioned deities. What I would encourage, meaning the Abrahamic tradition, even if it's Ab the Brahmin in India and his wife Saraswati, or if it's Abraham in the Christian tradition and his wife Sarah. So all these religions, if you truly study them, they're all unified, but they're also unified in a divisive way, meaning that obviously even the difference between, and this is what I was saying about egregors, that it's not even bearing a resemblance to what it was in the beginning. Because if you understand the principles of any of the pioneers, or let's say the messiahs of those traditions, they all spoke of things that are nowhere near close to really what people are doing now, yet they make themselves believe that they are. So the biggest thing then would just be honest with yourself and to see, hey, is what I'm doing who I truly am, or is it a limitation of who I really am? Now, don't get me wrong. Everything is a step on a ladder. You can't compute calculus if you don't know basic mathematics. So we're not discarding, because that creates conflict. You're not discarding someone else's beliefs and someone else's tradition and just saying that, you know, off with it, it has no value. We understand it as a piece in the foundation that a person's used, and then they're working to get to that next level. Now, here's what I will always introduce to anyone who's complaining about what someone else is doing. Do they have a better solution, and have you been able to present that to them? Because what you'll find is that most people in the world, like, they are in a comfort zone. This is how we all deal with things. If I just know that, hey, this religion, since nobody knows about death, may have some answers for me after that, then I may just stick with this. I'm not going to jump off into something that doesn't have any answers for me at all. So nobody has created that safe space to say, actually, there is a new vista out here where you can study other things about how your body accumulates power and what was really meant in these particular scriptures. So there's another level to it. And at the end of the day, that actually has a lot more to do with intentions than anything else. Meaning that if we are joining up to anything just to sit on the bench or just to listen and be dictated to, then we're always going to be in the wrong space. That's basically, our consciousness is working to push us to a level to where we begin to actually be grown up, the mentors, introducing things like newer systems of belief, right? But more of a system of knowing, forget belief, more graduated structures of education. So also what I will always advise is if there is a spiritual conflict going on internally, like let's say, for instance, you have maybe a spiritual conflict with your boyfriend or your mother. A lot of times what you really want to see from them can happen with changes in their diet. And what's happening is you may just be harping on the one area that you feel they're most vulnerable to and that you have the most power in. And this is what we always have to examine about ourselves, is that actually, if you really want to see mom do better, if you really want to see your boyfriend have a heart and a belief in his soul, it would probably start more with his diet than it would with him adapting to some kind of idea in his mind. And that's the most interesting part. We find changes within ourselves when we change actually our bodies, not so much as our minds. So when we want to get to the root of the thing, like let's say, for instance, and I'll give a great example. Obviously, I'm in Costa Rica. There's a lot of whitewater kayaking and that kind of thing. And so I went one time, and it was just after the Paris bombings, right? There were some Arab guys in the boat. There was some Caucasian ladies, I believe, actually from France, if I wasn't mistaken. there was me and a couple of my friends. So I actually thought that this was quite interesting, as I got on this, raft to see where this was really going to go. By the time we hit mid-river, we were all working together, because especially in the conditions we're in, if you're not working together, somebody's going to die or somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to fall off the kayak, hit a rock. Something's going to happen. So you saw how all of that programming and belief, et cetera, quickly dissipated when we worked with our motor skills and there was really something for us to accomplish as an objective. So what I find a lot of, let's say, judgments and prejudices that we've adapted, what I find is how we've attracted so much of that is just by being idle, just by not really having a plan or having a goal. Because when you have a plan, have a goal, especially if it's a big one, you're willing to take as much assistance, whether that's even coming through experience in your interactions with others. You're willing to take as much assistance as possible. And you're always looking to peer through another lens. See, for me to put myself behind the eyes of someone else that believes certain things, it puts me in the adaptability to see also what's going on around them, right? It's because I talk about how environment controls all this. So I'm like, okay, I can see how they believe in that. If everybody in a 100-mile radius believes in that same thing, if you don't believe in that, then you're clearly an outcast. They're facing more about changing their decision than we will be facing with a lot of the decisions that we need to be making. So what I'm saying is that that's where compassion comes in. Compassion is basically having the ability to sit down and navigate. That's why compass is there, to navigate through what you're dealing with. And that's why compassion always has to do with like what you experience with your mother, let's say, and with people who just have a genuine care for what's going on, even if they're risking themselves. See, a mother has a lot of compassion because if you ever remember when you got sick, she's in there and she's not thinking, I don't want to get sick. No, she's all in there, even if she gets sick, because that's where compassion kicks in. So compassion just basically says, hey, before I judge, before I slam my gavel down, let me get the whole picture. And that's always why they say what makes a good judge, right? Like the judge is hearing both sides. He's got an extra set of counsel that's also peering at it from another angle. So before we can judge, then we must look at the whole thing. Now, don't get me wrong. I remember, especially as a Gnostic, thinking that early in Gnosticism, that Buddhism was an idol worshiping religion. Because according to my knowledge about spirituality at that point, anybody who had some kind of statue of anybody in front of them, that's what they were. Now, anyone who really understands Buddhism says, man, what a weird limitation that person put in the mind of has put in their mind, okay? Because when you study it, you realize that actually there's a lot more to this. And the last thing what Buddha remains is just like a favorite CD that you have or something that you're still keeping around to remind you that, hey, that's the thing I like. And we all have that around us. So you see, it's just a part of our growth is what I'm saying. We need to learn, and many have already, how to continuously grow and keep growing and not remain stagnant. And this is what I'm saying is the key. Religion, or how we treat religion, how we treat prejudice, how we treat those, it could be anything. We have to constantly go back in our mind, if we choose to expand, and say, hey, you're doing it again. Simple tests with yourself. How long can I go before I don't have a problem or talk about anybody in my mind? Simple tests that you run on yourself. And the interesting thing is the benefits. Remember, this is a reward-based system. This is not, if you don't do it, then you're burned forever. This is not that kind of story. It's when you start practicing these principles of keeping yourself versatile in the flow, you create what we began to discover was unlimited bandwidth. And that's the easiest word to use for it, unlimited bandwidth, meaning that you can go into any situation and get a full open line of communication, because obviously you've understood how valuable communication is. But let me just show you how to turn things into parables and metaphors so you understand it deeper. If I call you through Skype, I can have a mega connection, 50 up, 50 down. And if you have a bad connection, I'm still going to get the and I'm not going to be able to cut the video on. So that's because of the bandwidth. So when you have opened your bandwidth, this means you're now receptive to the experience. You now open that communication for even more than just verbal. You can open it into video. You could open it into real life. So yeah, I guess it's probably a good time to take questions. But this is going to be one that you may have to go back over. But you know, I'm sure there's plenty of apt pupils here, so you can, you know, I'm sure you're getting it. Just overall, the gist of what's being said.
Any questions?
No questions?
No, I was just thinking, like, I have general, like, philosophical questions. I don't know.
She has a philosophical question.
I love those. She
There's-
may want to come a little closer, though.
I can repeat the question.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah, you can.
Sorry. Hi.
Hey.
Yeah. I was wondering if you agreed with, like, so you obviously don't agree that language is like, you wouldn't agree with, say, Chomsky's theory of nativism, you know, for language, would you? Like, you argue that we are shaped by language, but that we don't have language, like, inherently in us.
Right. That is the real big surprise, because obviously that's kind of logical to believe in things that way, that obviously language would develop and form itself. And actually, it doesn't work like that, because this geometry that you're looking at is actually embedded within the body also in different areas, also in the DNA. So it's really to say that DNA is actually the language. And what it does is it unravels itself over a certain period, which we call evolution. And that unraveling doesn't necessarily create what sounds like a more complex language. It creates the awareness of communication. And then how we choose to communicate from there actually seems to become universal. And the reason we know that is because we find linguistic systems on totally different parts of the world actually very similar to each other. So of course that's confused things, because some have then started developing a theory that maybe there was like some, and again, this has led to some really wonky ideas, not saying that they're wrong, but that basically someone had to have the ability to share languages, share the same language with people that were completely on different sides of the continent. But again, the best thing that I found for myself that allowed me to kind of like truly benefit from all the knowledge, because let's say, for instance, if someone's working at CERN, right, as an engineer, you may have been an engineer for 14, 15 years, and there's enough in what you know to really crack into something, actually even anti-aging properties. But what prevents that person from ever realizing they have the knowledge in their mind to do that? It's generally what's called compartmentalization. So compartmentalization, what it does is, it just basically doesn't allow us to access and use the rest of the knowledge that's in our minds. So to get out of that whole compartmentalization is just to really to start looking into stuff like this and accepting that there's another form of communication that we can use.
Would you also agree that people compartmentalize spiritually by limiting themselves to one, say, doctrine, faith, or even a sect of a certain faith?
Most definitely, you know, and this is not saying it in the negative way. I don't have to say it in a negative or positive way. It's something that we can actually study and then see the results of. Ultimately, anything can do that, though. Like, let's say, for instance, even the New Age religion, let's say New Age tradition, is supposed to be more expansive. But I've actually found people kind of stuck in the whole New Age thing. And so what it really is it's actually a way of being, that we can get to a point where we can constantly want to grow and realize this new level and know that it's already there. And the proof that we have of that is, you know, there's so many things, just basically looking at the sheer complexity and things like the anatomy of our bodies. So we know there's an intelligent design, but we also feel like that design is deluding us or eluding us, like that we can't figure it out. And that subconsciously bleeds over into us not being able to figure out ourselves. And so what I work with, and I would trust any elder, like let's say in the ancient culture, what they're doing is they're working to bring out your uniqueness. And so let me just give you a very brief example of how things are supposed to function from what we witnessed in the most thriving cultures. that the elders are the ones that will learn, the one that had the experience. They were just trying to coax you into unlocking your uniqueness. We know some people can sing, some people can, there's different people that do different things, but what's most important is the person who can bring that out of them, right? So there's also another benefit in being that person, because we deal in a reality right now. It's like, okay, if I know that you can be amazingly, even more incredible than what you are because of things that I've discovered, what often gets in the middle of all of that is that, but what is my benefit in actually bestowing that upon you, right? And that's kind of the reality. It's like, okay, you got master thinkers, and that's why I even do master classes, but it's almost like, what is their real benefit in teaching you what they know? And most of the time it has to be just money. So when you open that up just a bit and you say, hey, the benefit actually is if we unlock this person, if we bring out their uniqueness, what they'll bring is something that we didn't have. And there's enough excitement in that when you realize, when you're working in a collective, to want to coax people to bring that uniqueness out.
So you see self-actualization as an expression, the ultimate expression of individuality?
Well, what you're doing is you're breaching basically the stage of the paradox. See, because we're living in a big small, we're living in a night day. What happens with the mind? Like, I can show you where the mind ends. Where does nothing come from? You see, and this is what actually is going on in mathematics. If you understand etymology, mathematics is actually coming from the root of the Tibetan word ma'at, which means truth. Because obviously if 2 + 2 is always going to be 4. So using a code that's always going to equate to truth. So what's happening is that we can just get to this point. Now I'll cut this short as possible just to not, waste much time. What I'm working on explaining to you is that we are at the dawn of an entirely new time. But we're also seeing time as linear. We're not seeing time as something that we create the moment for. Like when the dawn happens, it's when you start becoming aware, not when everything else becomes aware around you. And if you can just notice what you do in your dreams alone. Do you have dreams? Okay, so you have dreams. So you have this system inside of your head that literally projects light, pictures, immerses you into a world, and you even believe for a while at night that that's even you. And maybe it is. But yet you're living in a world that has so little research on how is that even possible. It's comical. Meaning that a tool that we can use, because maybe you've heard of people who can lucid dream. These are people who actually can control themselves inside the dream. So wouldn't that be a great educational tool if we could just use our dreams as our world that we learn things from, since it feels so real? So that's why I was saying there's a new thing that's coming. And many people here may be the pioneers of that. And you start realizing that when you know yourself, like when you start cracking into all this and you realize some of the big things, the mysteries of the Sphinx, all of that, the thing that you're most fascinated about is not yourself. It's actually the people that are around you. Like, how are they even in your space? And this actually, that's what creates synchronicity. So it's a whole new way of looking at things. Instead of looking at it linear, it's like you're on the end of the timeline and you're watching it from there. You've already reverse engineered the entire thing. And you're looking back and you're saying, if I put myself into this position, then it will allow me to be not only the catalyst for others, but the chain reaction to the entire thing changing. But why would that be possible? And it's because just like you're seeing in the dream, it's all selective to you. And this is that's where the brain fries, because it's working binary. So it's like, well, if it was my world, well, what about her? And what about him? And what about my mom? Surely they're real people. And the truth is that's the wonders of the trinary code. It's quantum. It's where we can all be in different spaces and even each other's spaces, and then have our own space. And in English, in communication, this creates a paradox. So we're like, well, it's got to come from somewhere. But our sheer existence proves no, it doesn't. It actually comes from nothing. And our ability to compute that, try to put that in language, try to put it into a box, to give it any kind of dimensions, which are kind of like, this is the dimension we're living on, to try to measure it is impossible. So this is what we're talking about. The last thing that you should realize here is why we are really limitless. This is what it means. It means that there's a part of you that can't be defined. It can't actually be put into a mathematical equation. It can't actually be measured. It can't be even given a vector or a latitude and a longitude of where exactly it is. And having that alone, man, that is the greatest gift. So in any of these religious traditions, they always have this parable about wasting this gift. And they term it in different ways, the talents. So even having 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, a mind that can halfway compute, that's more than enough. You don't want to add on, and I need a triple masters, and I need a Mercedes, and I need to live in. You don't need to even add on any of that stuff because you already have something that's far more superior than that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any more questions? I want to respect your time. Anybody has any questions before we take our break?
I don't want to.
Okay, I'll repeat the question.
Well, so basically, the whole concept is that, like, we're looking at technology, but we're using technology as a metaphor for our consciousness. And basically, what we're stating is that we, like on the trinary system, that we have like so much more ways that we can, I guess, function. I'm like not looking at
Exactly. You have more versatility. It basically gives you that floating point. It gives you the ability to, instead that you made a decision or that you judged, it puts you in a point to be the observer, if not the arbitrator in the entire thing. Because honestly, when you start looking at energy consumption personally, like when we get upset, when things are not going our way, when we don't like something, there is actually an alarming amount of energy that is actually being spent in that process. So we're talking about being like the Prius in the world. You wouldn't spend all of your energy on processing a judgment. You would actually stay in more of a neutral, and then you would use the power that you've accumulated to actually produce a solution.
as opposed to using up whatever it is that you're processing. So
Exactly, because what would happen is the mind would just continuously, we're just talking about specifically in dealing with, prejudices of any type. The mind would, basically what happens if you watch it like let's say if we want to put this back onto the whole computer thing, it's like a code that keeps having an interruption. So it doesn't actually allow you to completely turn the wheel completely because you keep having to stop it. And this creates a disruption in the flow of your consciousness.
right, so we're not necessarily looking like bending like different, like the movie Lucy.
Well,
We're not looking at
go ahead, say that. Say what you're.
We're not necessarily looking at it like we're about. Have you seen the movie?
Yeah.
Okay, so are we trying to get on that level to where we're opening up our minds on a more broader spectrum to I guess achieve
To just answer your question directly, I have what everyone else is trying to do. I work to be a catalyst to promote people to do that as much as possible and give them the tools that's necessary. That level is very real. It's actually much more related to, let's say, if we called science authentic, we can relate it to science of how to achieve that. We can show that there are actual, not just bioethnogens, but actual different plants and trees that open up a different level of phenomena of experience. Like even the Nobel Peace Prize winner for DNA discovered that the pattern itself while on LSD. And it's just a simple thing. It actually boils all down to energetics. That's why, in many of these classes, they tell you, hey, everything is energy. But at the end of the day, what kind of energy does the body run on? Like what energies is assimilable for the body? It's not electricity, obviously. And the answer to that question is obviously chi. Chi is a different level of energy, prana, etc. So when you learn how to cultivate those kind of energies and then boost them, they give you the ability to turn on centers, different actual glands in your body that have different phenomena. So let's say, for instance, most of these are in your head. So how the body works is very similar to a thermometer. It uses the energy to run the primary centers of the consciousness or the body. So actually the predominant one is your reproductive organ. So if you expend yourself, let's say in an orgasm or whatever, semen or whatever, it generally will bring the energy down, and then the body will divert all of its energy into recovering that power, and then it will move to the rest of the centers. So this is, you know, facts, you know, what's discovered in anatomy, what's discovered in biology. So what happens is now if you're looking at it as a thermometer, now the last area to generally get this kind of energy is really in your consciousness, your mind, which is of course encasing the thymus. I mean, the hypothalamus, no, the hypothalamus gland, and then the thymus gland, excuse me, the thymus gland, the pituitary gland, and those glands that are in the head, which are actually responsible for projecting your dream. And that's why I was saying it's kind of comical that one of the most creative centers in our consciousness are the least explored when it comes to biology, but there are papers on it. So what causes the dream is the pituitary gland begins to function, and it works along with the thymus gland, and it literally has this light system, same thing that you would see in like those glowing octopus, that kind of light system that it has that it can use inside. And that's why people see that kind of phenomena when they get on certain substances. But to make a long story short, all of those faculties that are actually in this region are generally the last ones to get energy, because generally the body is diverting all the energy into the lower areas of the body, mainly the reproduction. We're hardwired to focus more of our energy there. So generally any spiritual practices, even Christianity and their celibacy, obviously Buddhism, monkism, all these religions try to solve that solution by just cutting out sex altogether, but that actually doesn't do it. The ancient traditions show that there needs to be a cycling of that energy. So in conclusion, we don't send much energy into the higher regions of our head to activate other parts of our consciousness because we don't use them. And there's other parts of the body also that because we're not using, it's just gone more of into a dormant phase. And so this is why things like even virtual reality, these kind of things, you know, it works with the frontal lobe. It does different things about how the person perceives reality after that. And there's just basically only studies going on right now what the full ramifications are going to be because of that.
All right. Any other questions? I definitely want to respect your time. Again, I appreciate you taking the time out.
Oh, I'm good, brother. You know me.
I know you in Puerto Vida, man. I know you in a different country. And, you know, just the whole idea of, you know, oppression, because this is something this class focused on: power, oppression, and the role of religion, the role of, discrimination, and how we reclaim our power. How do you reclaim your power to move effectively and make an impact on the world? So this is a lot of what the class is focused on. So, any last, before we close it, if anybody has any questions, because I know you guys probably got to use the bathroom, you want to take a break. They probably want to take a break in a second, but any last closing words you want to share on that? Oppression, power.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, well, if anyone wants to reach out, they can always reach out if they have any questions they may have forgot during this class, or they didn't feel like it was the right session to ask those questions. The only reason why I speak on such a high level of awareness and ability is because we're actually going into more of an era that's really demanding that you have that kind of access to your potential in order to find solutions. See, the ability of quantum is that it takes the time that would normally be necessary, let's say 3 years, 4 years to accomplish something, and it squashes it into like a couple of months. So this is why you would want to adapt that kind of way of functioning, because you may come into situations and you will feel like it's already too far gone. It's too late. Like nobody's going to be able to. This is kind of how most people look at the world right now. They're like, it's too late. Like nobody's going to be able to change this. It's like in a tailspin. Like, look what's happened to the kids. But they don't realize that actually what's also occurring simultaneously is this quantum awareness, which is why we have Googles, why we have Facebooks, why we have this conversation that we're having right now in a totally untraditional setting. And it's because the more that the demand is happening for a change, the more the quantum field is configuring itself to come up with a massive implementation and make that change. Because ultimately, it's in our instincts. We want to survive, okay? And that's the biggest thing that I can explain to everyone here, is that it's in our instinct, a wiring for survival. So once this adaptation begins to take place with the connection to self more, then this is going to simultaneously kick off, and has already done so, this selflessness that actually people realize is the highest form of selfishness. And so they're going to see the paradox. They're going to see how all of it connects, that how AI at the end goes to singularity, which is going to make people aware of their own consciousness. And so it's all like, it's basically a bait and switch process. And this is why I would look then back at the code, because at the end of the day, I'll say this and I'm done. What I started noticing is it was basically going backwards. And this will really boil your mind for a while. But look at the word, backwards. The words are backwards. That literally the direction of the way the language is moving in was actually governing the direction that we thought we're moving in. And then once we let go of that kind of way of processing things, we pull ourselves out of time. Then we give ourselves more space. So you just know. That's where the knowing comes in. You know that you're going to be able to handle this. There's so much confidence that happens. You realize that you've been called in. You're the one. It's not going to happen on your watch. This is all about you. So you see how that selfishness, it's all about you. You got to get yourself together, get yourself adapted and equipped to be able to deal with anything, creates this high level of selflessness, because when you go into any situation, you're going to really be able to do something there that others would have been like, well, how are they just going to come along and change things? And the thing is you didn't just come along. Like, it's been a process. And that's what I would tell everyone here is this is a process. And I've just started a chain reaction today about thinking, because we do it a lot, but just something to put in the old noggin, especially before you go to sleep. And just think about some of these deeper things, and it'll start you already know. And I won't even get into the all-knowing conversation today, but actually it's already encoded in who you are. You just gotta extract it. So you're basically mining yourself for the gold. And so that's your thoughts, your ideas, your children, everything that you can produce here. So that's it.
That was the end.
That was the end, I swear. He's like, man, I would not like to be in that guy's class. Like,
no, so here's the question. I mean, we had the people to take a small break, but a website, how can somebody get a hold of you if they want to hear more, learn more, engage more? What would be the best website or the best way for you to contact? For them to contact you?
Book, like just direct contact.
Okay, hold on.
And it's just because, yeah, a lot of the websites are, obviously direct.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. Sound. But something is happening with, let's try this again.
Okay, well, I could just tell you right now. I mean, obviously, I know everyone is ready to take a break, but, the easiest way.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the easiest way to contact me directly would be through Facebook. And that's facebook.com/Innerstand. That's INNERSTAND. And yeah, and all the websites, obviously they're designed for what they're related to. Secret Energy is the main website. And then there's another website that we decided to open up, which was just to offer a form of employment. And now we actually have 1,200 employees, which is amazing, because all these people come from, different walks of life. And, some start with, it's just like, there's no real prerequisite. So we just teach people from where they are. If they can read the site, we can take them from there. And that's SpiritTechs, SpiritTechs. And that's .com.
I'll have the websites up.
Okay.
I'll put the websites up for those who don't.
Okay, great. And that's it. So, and predominantly we're working on creating devices.
Are you on Instagram? Are you on the gram?
Yeah, of course I'm on the gram. Wait. No, I'm on Instagram as AstralQuest. That's STRAL Quest, QUEST, all one word.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I get that information out to everyone. Again, on a behalf of the class, did y'all feel like y'all gained something from this, or this is a waste of your time, or what? No, but we really appreciate you taking the time out to really contact us and to just take, to share some of these words with us. And I think it was indeed powerful in a way where it is an opportunity, it is a paradigm shift where we have to start grounding who we are, especially in doing the work that we are tasked to do. Exactly. And I appreciate you at least giving us that opportunity, sharing some of those opportunities with us.
For sure. For sure. And then while you're doing stuff for others, don't forget about yourself. Like, keep developing yourself. Don't get stuck.
All right. So I'll definitely leave with that. Appreciate you, big brother.
Okay.
And you have a good one, all right?
You too. Wholeness.
Wholeness.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next generation of science.
Is there any way in which one's mind can be